The fire crackled in the distance between them, its light suffusing all their history with its red glow. She remembered the last time she'd seen him as she took her seat on the train that would bear her home. Remembered how Cole had looked standing on the platform, a morose figure surrounded by all those cheerful farewells. How as the train pulled away and the cylinders in his brain fired and caught up, he must have realized there would be no goodbye. How he'd scanned the windows, and for a moment they'd locked eyes just as the train trundled from the platform. When Cole spoke again, he sounded unbearably tired. "What do you want?" he asked. "To rewrite past mistakes." "So that's it?" he asked, his tone bitter, yet also dull and without edge. He was angry, but it was an anger too weary to bite, an anger born year after year till it sagged from the bone. 11 years. You don't speak to me for 11 years, not a word. Then suddenly you catch me on the train in the dead of night, and you tell me you're sorry, as if that will make everything right. 11 years, 11. Shaking his head, he walked to the window. The reflection stared back from the heart of the storm. You were always the same, you know that. Always quick to judge others, to see the faults in everyone around you, but never in yourself. He took a deep breath, then he said plaintively, "You're not sorry." "No, you need me. Tell me the truth." She dropped her head. "Yes. You want to be a part of it again after everything you said to me, after betraying my trust, after 11 years. You think you deserve that?" She was silent. "I thought you detested the idea." "I did," she began. But now you're desperate. Now you have something on the line, something you care about. Tell me I'm wrong." She sank down in her chair. There was no point trying to save face. "You're right." She gripped the armrests. "I'm sorry, Cole." "There's that word again," he said, his voice dry and tight and utterly without emotion. "Long have I waited to hear that word. Long have I waited to see you fall, to see you suffer." "And how does it feel now that the day has finally come?" she asked quietly. Cole pressed his forehead against the glass, and the shadows of the rain twisted themselves like worms across his face, as if he were already dead and buried. "I'm begging you, for the love you once bore me, please." She crossed the room and lay her hand on his shoulder. "Please." "Even if I wanted to," Cole said, his voice muffled by the glass, "I couldn't." "The recursionem infinitum," she said, the realization dawning on her. "We never perfected it. The trials were all failures," Cole finished. She squeezed Cole's shoulder. "Let me help. Together we can do it. You know we can. Like old times." "And what of the cost?" His voice dribbled out, barely audible above the pounding rain. "Do you remember?" She swallowed. "Any price. We'll pay it." Cole turned, and their eyes met. Even amid the wash of darkness, like cords of vibrating black, she could make out his eyes, startling in their color, eyes bright and cold and blue as a winter moon, eyes now filled with tears. Together. Cold air filled her lungs. She coughed and turned onto her side and dry heaved into the grass. Her lungs felt like old dried rubber. She clawed at the dirt, her insides screaming from the touch of air and the push of blood. Him. The realization crushed every other thought out of her. Cole. Again she lay on a white table in a white room. A man with bright blue eyes hovered above her, his mouth and nose hidden behind a surgical mask. "Begin recording," he said, his voice low and soft, yet full of cruel excitement. He lowered the scalpel. Her eye swiveled madly in her head. Trial 14. She shivered and pushed herself up so that she was sitting against the stone wall. It was him. There could be no doubt. She recognized those eyes. It was him, the one who had tortured her, killed her again and again. Cole. She said the name again, holding on to it, afraid to lose it. Cole. She said it in her mind, as if merely thinking it could summon him before her. What did he do to me? She pulled the wet, bloody rag of her surgical gown aside, trying to remember everything that had happened. She traced her fingers across her abdomen. Impossible. Though crusted in blood, the skin beneath was smooth and taut. I was burned. She remembered the crackle as the fire tore through her, the spark of light, the smoke. I was dying. The blood pumped out of her, drained into the soil. She'd seen things. She tried to recall everything, but it kept slipping away. Faces, a golden light, the Noctura. She'd seen that other world again. She'd gone there after death. She swallowed. It was just like before, on the train. She palmed the dried blood stuck to her side. Is that how I survived? She remembered before how the Noctura had seemed to slide inside of her, disappearing into her body. Was it inside of her now, arcing through the orbit of her veins, draining through the crenellations of her brain? She massaged her wrists, where the restraints had rubbed, but the skin was white and smooth. Then there was the vision in the train's sitting room. Somehow she'd seen Cole just now, aboard the train she'd just left. How? She tried to remember the feeling. It had been as if she were inside someone else's head. She felt the emotions, the landscape of the thoughts. But whose thoughts? Whose emotions? They were planning something. She'd gone to apologize and to join him. Apologize for what? And what were they working on? Her mind twisted back on itself. Her thoughts raced. One thing was clear, though. She remembered her time on the operating table in the White Room. A voice spoke that wasn't Cole's voice. "Continue your work in Sotsu," it said. "I'll prepare a transport to take her to the academy." Whatever they were up to, that's where they were headed. Sotsu. Academy, she thought grimly. It was then she saw it. A dark brown, almost black mark in the center of her right hand. It looked almost as if the flesh were diseased. The shape of it seemed familiar, and after a moment she knew why. A stigmata. It looked just like a stigmata, only the wrong color and in the wrong hand. She felt the tattered skin, and it was like the husk of leaves in fall. What's happening to me? Just then a gentle wind lifted the folds of her gown, and quite suddenly she was aware of how cold it had become. The drying blood chilled her. Her hands and feet were numb, and her skin had turned a wan sort of blue. Survival. That was what she needed to worry about now. Cole and the Noctura and the stigmata and everything else would have to wait. This comes first. She wrapped her arms around her chest and squeezed herself tightly. She needed to find shelter and proper clothing. The wind picked up again. She shivered violently. Goosebumps crowded her flesh. Briefly, she wondered whether she'd come back to life if she froze to death. Would I come back at all? Is there a limit to the number of times? With these thoughts swirling around her head, she peeked over the edge of the stone wall. Beyond was a narrow street, crowded either side by the boxy Tsukihaka-style houses, each one tall and narrow with sliding doors and shutters and a ceramic tile roof. Smoke spiraled from the chimney of the nearest house. She checked the height of the moon. A half hour after daybreak, maybe. That didn't leave her much time. Soon the people who lived here would be up and about, men off to work, the women out to buy the day's food, children running and playing through the streets. She couldn't afford to be seen. People were bound to talk if they saw an Anglian girl wandering around, and even more an Anglian girl in a blood-stained surgical gown. Ideally, she'd find a clothesline, steal an outfit, and vanish into the hills. At night, she could sneak back in and try to steal something to eat. She looked up and down the row of houses. Whatever I do, I need to hurry. She stood, her legs unsteady, her heart hammering. It's not going to get any easier. And with that, she slipped over the edge of the wall.